Hello, SKs. We are back with Charlotte's Web, chapter 19. It's called the Egg Sac, and we are very close to the end. Here we go. Next morning, when the first light came into the sky and the sparrows stirred in the trees, when the cows rattled their chains and the rooster crowed and the early automobiles went whispering along the road, Wilbur awoke and looked for Charlotte. He saw her up overhead in a corner near the back of his pen. She was very quiet. Her 8 legs were spread wide. She seemed to have shrunk during the night. Next to her, attached to the ceiling, Wilbur saw a curious object. It was a sort of a sack or cocoon. It was peach-colored and looked as though it were made of cotton candy. "Are you awake, Charlotte?" Wilbur asked softly. "Yes," came the answer. "What's that nifty little thing? Did you make it?" "I did indeed," replied Charlotte in a rather weak voice. "Well, is it a plaything?" "Plaything? I should say not. It is my egg sac, my magnum opus." "Well, I don't know what a magnum opus is," said Wilbur. "That's Latin," explained Charlotte. "It means great work. This egg sac is my great work, the finest thing I have ever made." "Well, what's inside it?" asked Wilbur. "Eggs?" 514 of them," Charlotte replied. 514? said Wilbur. "You're kidding me." "No, I'm not. I counted them. I got started counting, so I just kept on, to keep my mind occupied." "Well, it's a perfectly beautiful egg sac," said Wilbur, feeling as happy as though he had constructed it himself. "Yes, it is pretty," replied Charlotte, patting the sack with her 2 front legs. "Anyway, I can guarantee that it's strong. It's made out of the toughest material I have, and it's waterproof. The eggs are inside, and they will stay warm and dry." "Charlotte," said Wilbur dreamily, "are you really going to have 514 children?" "If nothing happens, yes," she said. "Of course, they won't show up until next spring." Wilbur noticed that Charlotte's voice sounded sad. "Charlotte, what makes you sound so downhearted? I think you'd be terribly happy about this." "Oh, don't pay any attention to me," said Charlotte. "I just don't have much pep anymore. I guess I feel sad because I won't ever see my children." "Well, what do you mean you won't see your children? Of course you will. We'll all see them. It's going to be simply wonderful next spring in the barn cellar, with 514 baby spiders running around all over the place. And the geese will have a new set of goslings, and the sheep will have their new lambs, and—" "Maybe," said Charlotte quietly. "However, I have a feeling I'm not going to see the results of last night's efforts. I don't feel good, Wilbur. I don't feel good at all. I think I'm languishing, to tell you the truth." Wilbur did not understand the word languish, and he hated to bother Charlotte by asking her to explain. But he was so worried, he felt he simply had to ask. "Charlotte, what does languishing mean?" "It means I'm slowing up. I'm feeling my age. I'm not young anymore, Wilbur. But I don't want you to worry about me. This is your big day. Look at my web. Doesn't it show up well, with the dew on it?" Charlotte's web never looked more beautiful than it looked this morning. Each strand held dozens of bright drops of early morning dew. The light from the east struck it and made it all plain and clear. It was a perfect piece of designing and building. In another hour or two, a steady stream of people would pass by, admiring it, reading the word inside, and looking at Wilbur, marveling at the miracle. As Wilbur was studying the web, a pair of whiskers and a sharp face appeared. Slowly, Templeton dragged himself across the pen and threw himself down in the corner. "I'm back," he said in a husky voice. "What a night!" The rat was swollen to twice his normal size. His stomach was as big around as a jelly jar, which is rather more than it should be. "What a night!" he repeated hoarsely. "What feasting! What carousing! Oh, it was a real gorge! I must have eaten the remains of 30 lunches. Never have I seen such leavings, everything well ripened and seasoned with the passage of time and the heat of the day. It was rich, my friends. It was rich." "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," said Charlotte in disgust. "It would serve you right if you had an acute attack of indigestion." "Don't worry about my stomach," snarled Templeton. "It can handle anything. By the way, I've got some bad news. As I came past that pig next door, the one that calls himself Uncle, I noticed a blue tag on the front of his pen. That means he won first prize. Guess you're licked, Wilbur. You might as well relax. Nobody's going to hang any medal on you. Furthermore, I wouldn't be surprised if Zuckerman changes his mind about you. Just wait till he gets a hankering for some fresh pork, a little smoked ham, some crisp bacon. Oh, he's going to take the knife to you, my boy." "Be still, Templeton," said Charlotte. "You're too stuffed and bloated to know what you're saying. Wilbur, don't you pay him any attention." Wilbur tried not to think about what the rat had just said. He decided to change the subject. "Templeton," said Wilbur, "if you weren't being so dopey, you would have noticed that Charlotte has an egg sac. She's going to become a mother. For your information, there are 514 eggs in that peachy little sac." "Is this true?" asked the rat, eyeing the sac suspiciously. "Yes, it's true," sighed Charlotte. "Well, congratulations," murmured Templeton. "This has been a night." He closed his eyes, pulled some straw over himself, and dropped off into a deep sleep. Wilbur and Charlotte were glad to be rid of him, at least for now. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Mr. Arable's truck rolled into the fairgrounds and came to a stop at Wilbur's pen. Everybody climbed out. "Look!" cried Fern. "Look at Charlotte's web! Look what it says!" The grown-ups and the children joined hands and stood there, studying the sign. "Humble," said Mr. Zuckerman. "Now, isn't that just the word for our Wilbur?" Everyone rejoiced to find that the miracle of the web had been repeated. Wilbur gazed lovingly into their faces, and he looked very humble and very grateful indeed. Fern winked at Charlotte. Lurvy soon got busy. He poured a bucket of warm slops into the trough, and while Wilbur ate his breakfast, Lurvy scratched him gently with a smooth stick. "Wait a minute," cried Avery. "Look at this." He pointed to the blue tag on Uncle's pen. "This pig won first prize already." The Zuckermans and the Arables stared at the tag. Mrs. Zuckerman began to cry. Nobody said a word. They just stared at the tag, and then they stared at Uncle, and then they stared at the tag again. Lurvy took out an enormous handkerchief and blew his nose very loud, so loud, in fact, that the noise was heard by stable boys over at the horse barn. "Can I have some money?" asked Fern. "I want to go out on the Midway again." "You stay right where you are," said her mother. Now tears came to Fern's eyes. "Well, what's everybody crying about?" asked Mr. Zuckerman. "Come on, let's get busy. Edith, bring on the buttermilk." Mrs. Zuckerman wiped her eyes with her handkerchief. She went to the truck and came back with a gallon jar of buttermilk. "Bath time," said Zuckerman cheerfully. He and Mrs. Zuckerman and Avery climbed into Wilbur's pen. Avery slowly poured buttermilk on Wilbur's head and back, and as it trickled down his sides and cheeks, Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman rubbed it into his hair and skin. Passers-by stopped to watch. Pretty soon quite a crowd had gathered. Wilbur grew beautifully white and smooth. The morning sun shone through his little pink ears. Well, he isn't as big as that pig next door, remarked a bystander, but he's cleaner, and that's what I like. So do I, said another. He's humble, too, said a woman, reading the sign on the web. Everybody who visited the pig pen had a good word to say about Wilbur. Everyone admired the web, and of course, nobody noticed Charlotte. Suddenly, a voice was heard on the loudspeaker. "Attention, please," it said. "Will Mr. Homer Zuckerman bring his famous pig to the judge's booth in front of the grandstand? A special award will be made there in 20 minutes. Everyone is invited to attend. Crate your pig, please, Mr. Zuckerman, and report to the judge's booth promptly." For a moment after the announcement, the Arables and the Zuckermans were unable to speak or move. Then Avery picked up a handful of straw and threw it in the air and gave a loud yell. The straw fluttered down like confetti into Fern's hair. Mr. Zuckerman hugged Mrs. Zuckerman. Mr. Arable kissed Mrs. Arable. Avery kissed Wilbur. Lurvy shook hands with everybody. Fern hugged her mother. Avery hugged Fern, and Mrs. Arable hugged Mrs. Zuckerman. Up overhead, in the shadows of the ceiling, Charlotte crouched unseen, her front legs encircling her egg sac. Her heart was not beating as strongly as usual. She felt weary and old. But now she was sure at last that she really had saved Wilbur's life, and so she also felt peaceful and contented. "We've got no time to lose," shouted Mr. Zuckerman. "Lurvy, help me with that crate." "Can I have some money, please?" asked Fern. "You wait," said Mrs. Arable. "Can't you see everybody's busy?" "Put that empty buttermilk jar into the truck," commanded Mr. Arable. Avery grabbed the jar and rushed to the truck. "Oh, does my hair look all right?" asked Mrs. Zuckerman, wondering how she was going to stand being in front of all those people. "It looks fine," snapped Mr. Zuckerman as he and Lurvy set the crate down in front of Wilbur. "But you didn't even look at my hair," said Mrs. Zuckerman. "You look lovely, Edith," said Mrs. Arable. "Now keep calm." Templeton, asleep in the straw, heard the commotion and woke up. He didn't know exactly what was going on, but when he saw the people shoving Wilbur into the crate, he made up his mind to go along. He watched his chance, and when no one was looking, he crept into the crate and buried himself in the straw at the bottom. "All ready, everyone," he cried. "Let's go on 3. 1, 2, 3. Everyone grabbed the crate and boosted it over the side of the pen and up into the truck. Fern jumped aboard and sat on top. She still had straw in her hair and looked lovely and excited. Mr. Arable started the motor, everyone climbed in, and off they drove to the judge's booth in front of the grandstand. As they passed the Ferris wheel, Fern gazed up at it and wished she were in the topmost car, with her friend Henry Fussy at her side. And that's the end of chapter 19.